have a really packed session, and we want to make sure that we have good use of the hour. So, or the hour or so, because I have a feeling this might go over, but we're going to try and keep this going for an hour. So welcome again to this webinar discussion presented by Demand Africa, the ENDSARS movement and the African diaspora. Presented by Demand Africa, a division of the Africa channel. Now, many of you already know me, and if you do, nice to see you all again. And for those of you who don't, my name is Claudine Moore. I'm the MD and founder of Seymour Media International Public Relations. And we are a US headquartered PR agency that specializes in African markets. We've been working in African markets for the last decade, and African markets, specifically Nigeria. I've lived and worked in Lagos. I have a team that's both in the US and in Nigeria. And a fun fact, I think in the last decade, I've been to Nigeria nearly 30 times, if not 30 times. Like, my passport is littered with green stamps. And so when I spent my time in Nigeria, it's been to work with our clients, but it's also been to work with lots of young people through my involvement with, whether it's Social Media Week Lagos, whether it's also my involvement with the Tony Elumelu Foundation, but I've come to work with young people, and I've actually spent more time in the last decade in Nigeria specifically than I have in my own Caribbean islands. So suffice to say, Nigeria and Nigerians are very, very close to my heart. So it is really an honor to be co-hosting this webinar this afternoon or this evening. So for those of you who are familiar with the Africa channel, it needs no introduction. But for those of you who are new to the Demand Africa platform, Demand Africa is a global streaming video service connecting audiences to the best lifestyle, movies, and TV from Africa and beyond. Demand Africa's aim is to amplify Africa's influence on the world by connecting global audiences to African content, and it is available on the internet, mobile devices, TV devices, and third-party platforms. So I'm co-hosting this event with Ngozi Odita, who many of you know, but for those of you who don't know Ngozi, I'll let her introduce herself. Ngozi?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Ngozi Odita. I'm Nigerian, currently in the US at the moment. I am founder of Social Media Week Lagos, which is a tech and innovation event that takes place in Lagos, Nigeria, and has taken place annually for 8 years there. It's a 5-day event, and we have over 15,000 attendees who attend annually. I'm also founder of AfricaNXT, which is a multidisciplinary production outfit, and we basically curate spaces and experiences for people who are passionate about Africa to connect. And I'm really excited to be here today and lead this very, very important conversation and help kind of create bridges between Nigerians and the diaspora to help further the movement on the ground.
Thank you, Ngozi. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce some really special panelists to everybody. I'm going to allow them each to introduce themselves, but I just want to thank you all for joining us. So Tomiwa Aladekomo.
Close enough.
Was that okay?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Thank you, Tomiwa.
All right. Thanks, Claudine. Thanks for having me. My name is Tomiwa Aladekomo, and I'm the CEO of Big Cabal Media. We're based out of Lagos, Nigeria, and we publish Tech Cabal, which covers technology across the continent and kind of grapples with the impact and the human impact of technology, the business of technology, where it's taking us, what it's doing. We also publish a second publication called Zikoko, which is a lot more Nigeria and West Africa focused. And Zikoko tackles all things that young people care about. And that's everything from money to travel, to relationships, to sex, to we cover all of that. And in the last few weeks, what they've cared about are protesting police brutality. So we've done a lot of coverage of that as well. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Claudine. Yeah.
Thank you. And you guys do the best polls as well.
Yes, quizzes.
Quizzes.
We are fun.
Sometimes I do good, sometimes I don't do too good, but I love your quizzes as well. Thank you, Tomiwa. Michelle Bello, thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Michelle Bello. I'm a filmmaker. I'm CEO of my own film and TV production company, Blue Star Entertainment. I'm also head of content for White Harvest Organization, which is an NGO here based in Lagos, Nigeria, of entertainers. So we have Nollywood movie stars, directors, producers, and we all came together and we decided that we need to do something to change the narrative of the continent and putting out positive images through short films, which we've posted some of them on social media already, and we're doing a lot more. So I'm just really excited to be here.
Okay, great, thank you. And then Tony Sebastian Ukpo.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, and thanks for all of you tuning in. My name is Tony Sebastian Ukpo. I'm a writer, director, and photographer based in France currently, formerly based in the UK. I'm Nigerian, and my main focus is on narrative feature filmmaking. You might have seen some of my work that I've done in Nigeria, like the film Mom, Dad, Meet Sam, which was a British-Nigeria co-production, as well as other independent international films.
Thank you, Tony. Joining us from Brittany in France, which is like you're about to go on lockdown, I think, right?
We are indeed, yeah. We just hit the second lockdown. So after the second wave kind of like took another peak, we finally kind of got back into confinement.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before when we were preparing, thank you again for sharing your last few hours of freedom with us this afternoon, this evening. And then finally, Busayo Olupona.
Really good.
Thank you.
That was excellent.
Thank you.
So I'm Busayo. I am the founder or creator of Busayo NYC, which is a fashion company. We create all of our textiles and apparel in traditional indigenous textiles in Nigeria, primarily Adire. So I have been building my Nigeria-based business really since 2011. So all the work is created in Nigeria, and my customer base is in Nigeria as well as in America. So my business sort of straddles both cultures and both countries. And so I'm really happy to be here. I'm also an attorney. But yes, thank you for having me. Such a joy.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. So I am just going to let everybody know that we are taking questions from the audience. So if you have any questions for our panelists, you have any comments, just please put them in the chat and we will get to them as quickly and as we can, as thoroughly as we can. And also for those of you who are tuning, please, if you decide to tweet about this event, the hashtag is #DemandAfrica or #DemandAfricaEndSARS. Either one will work. But the first, this is going to be an interactive discussion, but I did want to, well, actually, we're going to start with Ngozi, actually. If you could just sort of like set the stage for us, set the stage for where this conversation is going to start. And just not introduce, but sort of explain how we got here in terms of the ENDSARS movement.
So I think because this is, I'm assuming a lot of people within the diaspora are part of this audience. I think a lot of people, if you were not in Nigeria, kind of became hyper aware of what happened on last week, October 20th, because there was mass killings at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos. But however, this movement and the movement to end SARS has been going on for some time now. SARS is actually the special anti-robbery squad in Nigeria, started by the Nigerian police force. It was created in, I believe, 1992 to address armed robbery and crime in Nigeria. But around 2009, they kind of, their focus, they also started to focus on internet fraud. And that's kind of when the youth angle began to come in. So you have in 2009, connectivity across the continent, Nigeria included, is growing. Tech as an industry is growing as well. And obviously, mostly young people make up that industry. So that's when you have the targeting of young people whether, you know, with a certain look, maybe they had dreadlocks, maybe they had tattoos, definitely they had iPhones and nice computers. So they were targeted and basically extorted. And that's been going on, like I said, since 2009. And it's not simply just like a stop and frisk situation. Like, it's a stop and I'm going to extort you kind of situation. So give me your phone, let me find out your bank details. Where do you bank with? Now go to the ATM and get me money. And it can escalate from there to you getting physically harassed, all the way up to beatings, rape, murder. It goes on. So that has been going on, and the movement to end SARS, many Nigerians, young Nigerians, have been active about it. So if you followed the hashtag on Twitter or IG, you've seen it prior to now. But kind of what set these incidences currently in October going was on October 3rd, when a video appeared online of a young man being killed by SARS. So the hashtag for ENDSARS started trending again. There was lots of outrage. And then the young man who filmed the killing was arrested as well. So that was kind of like the precipitous that made people decide, once again, we're taking to the streets. So the first grouping of protests, I think, happened around October 8th. And the demands were the same. We want SARS to end. On October 11th, the Inspector General of Nigeria said that we're going to disband SARS. However, that has been said in the past. So it wasn't, people weren't like, yay, our protesting has, we've gotten, you know, our demands are being met. No, a lot of people were like, this has been said before. We're still in these streets because we don't believe that this is really gonna happen. So when the Inspector General announced on October 11th that that SARS would be disbanded, he also released like 5 kind of like tenets, or this is what we're going to do around the disbanding of SARS. From those 5 points, out of the protest came 5 for 5. And these were 5 demands that were being made by the public, by the youth, of what you need to meet these demands in order for like us to not be in the streets and for us to really understand that progress is happening. And some of those demands were like the immediate release of arrested protesters. So like I said, the protests had been happening since the 8th of August, and now we're at the 11th. So many protesters had been arrested. Many people had been injured. So they wanted all arrested protesters to be released. They also wanted justice for those who were killed or hurt by SARS. They wanted to set up an independent body to review all of the cases, and they wanted training for, they wanted not just the SARS unit to be disbanded, they wanted all those officers to be retrained and have psychological evaluations before they returned to the police force. And then the final thing was increased pay for police. So just to give context to that, I know when a lot of people in the diaspora, people in the US were like, where there's a movement to defund police, are like, why would you want them to be paid more? Police in Nigeria are paid horribly, they live in horrible conditions, and that is some of the reason why they're extorting people in the street, because that is how they subsidize their lack of income. So that is why they were also saying increased wages for police. So, so that happened, that's around October 11th. The demands were not met. There wasn't much movement around what they were asking for, and the protests continued. Tear gassing, water cannons, sometimes even shooting live rounds into protesters was happening prior to the 20th. So now we get to the 20th, and in that morning or during the day of the 20th, the cameras, so there were protests happening across Nigeria. So this wasn't just like in Lagos or just in Abuja. Across Nigeria in different states, people are protesting. But at the Lekki toll gate, kind of was like a ground zero where there was like a critical mass every single day, thousands of people. So a lot of attention was paid at Lekki toll gate. So on the 20th, the cameras that were there, surveillance cameras, were removed from Lekki toll gate in the middle of the day. And that kind of signaled to people something was gonna happen. Also, the governor of Lagos State issued a curfew saying everybody must be off the streets by 4 p.m. as well. And then people also saw military coming in and more police were coming out. So that was kind of what was happening throughout the day on the 20th. And then in the evening, all the lights were shut off at the Lekki toll gate, and the military began to fire upon peaceful protesters who were sitting down, waving Nigerian flags, singing the anthem. And a lot of the reason why we know what happened and saw footage from there was from a woman called DJ Switch. That is obviously her stage name, but she went live from the Lekki toll gate, and over 150,000 people out all over saw this footage. And that's kind of how we knew what was happening. But people were literally like giving her, like they were removing bullets from people. People were instructing them how to provide care for people who were shot. So that's what happened on the 20th. And now we are here now, and a lot has transpired since then, but I'll stop here in interest of time, because I'm sure we're going to talk about what has happened in the aftermath of the massacre at the toll gate.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ngozi. That was a really good overview, and I think it's important for all of us to, especially for those who are new to finding out about this, just to really understand, as Ngozi mentioned, this has been happening for several years, and it's just almost really hit a flashpoint now, and that's where we are. Like with the Black Lives Matter movement, and what happened to George Floyd was a flashpoint in that movement that's been going on for several years. This is a flashpoint now. So I want to go over to Tomiwa, because I have been, since last year, Tech Cabal has been really quite, vocal, very bold, and very sort of thoughtful and substantive, I want to say, in their covering of ENDSARS, especially as it affects the tech community. And that has just increased in the last few weeks. Even before last Tuesday, every time I go onto your website, every time I look at your Instagram or your Twitter, there's always new information, new insights. And what I love about the coverage is that it's very bold. It's just very, very bold. So my question for Tomiwa is, what was the reason you and your team really began to create this data? Like, why was it so important for you to do this? And what has it shown to you? And where do you get your sources from? And what are some of the insights?
About a year ago, there was an incident that involved someone in the tech community that got a fair bit of publicity. A guy who goes by Tony Astro on Twitter had an incident with Sars unit, and they extorted him of, I think, about 100,000 Naira or something, but just really traumatic experience. He was detained and missing for a long time, probably overnight. People were looking for him, and he kind of came online and narrated this really vividly. Out of that narration kind of came this uproar, and I think Bosun Tijani of CC Hub was the first one to really say, listen, like, this has been happening. We've all been seeing it happening. We've got to do something about this. And so this big effort kind of happened within the technology industry, where a whole bunch of people came together to really tackle this thing. And people donated money, probably like 2 million Naira or 3 million Naira fairly quickly. We set up a WhatsApp group. We hired lawyers. We made a lot of noise about it, both locally and internationally. And Tech Cabal, of course, started to cover it a lot more seriously. And I think we probably touched on it before, but this really kind of brought it forward in the center of our sort of coverage, because you're looking for what are the big themes that are affecting your industry? What are the big themes that are kind of driving people or driving the decisions make? And SARS and police brutality and sort of that unsafety around the authorities had become a dominant conversation theme, and actually an impetus for people to leave the country, an impetus for people to sort of leave Nigeria. And especially because technology jobs, frequently, once you start to develop in them, do offer you the opportunity to go work in other countries. If you have real skills, if you have real talent, there's always going to be somebody who's willing to hire you in Europe, in Asia, in the US or Canada, whatever it is. So we're starting to see people, and I think we're in 2020 right now. 2019 was a year of serious exodus from Nigeria. So we've got kind of the brain drain starting again. And it's driven as much by economic concerns as things like ENDSARS and the police brutality. Because people just, if I can't feel safe at home, and I just saw something this evening where someone just had an experience this evening, and he's narrated it on Twitter, and his last words on that tweet are, "I'm done with this country." So for us, it was clear that this was really important. And I've talked to competitors of mine or people in the fintech space who lost half their teams last year to people moving out of the country. So we started to cover it really intensely, and that effort by the tech industry was pretty robust. We engaged with legislators, we engaged with the state government, we engaged with the Office of the Vice President, we wrote a letter to the President, we drummed up a bunch of international attention towards it. And there's an article we've written in the last couple of weeks which addresses the impact of that massive effort by the tech industry. I think the last thing we were going to do was we're actually going to sue the government, both at state and federal level. That didn't really happen because there weren't many victims who were willing to sort of come forward, stick through the entire process, sort of testify in court. And so the article that we wrote fairly recently about like what the impact of that whole effort was not very much, because we have a government that's just famously non-responsive and doesn't have to be responsive. So why did we double and triple down on the coverage, both on the Tech Cabal and the Zikoko site over the last few weeks? Because people need context. People need to understand what's happening. And this might seem like a fairly straightforward issue. I think Ngozi did a fantastic job in terms of, and a very detailed job in terms of sort of the background on this. You know, it's not stop and frisk. You know, it's not analogous to sort of the Black Lives Movement in the US. Of course, there's, you know, we're both protesting police brutality and we're asking to be able to live full lives, but the complexities of it are completely different. You know, the root causes are completely different. The sort of things that are happening on ground are completely different. And so for us, what's been important is giving people context, helping them understand it. There's also been the fact that the mainstream media really didn't cover this very well, if they covered it at all. I mean, they came in late, they came in state biased, because so many of them are state funded, whether that's directly or by advertising or through patronage. And so they didn't do a very robust job, leaving lots of the independent sort of media companies to kind of fill that gap. And for us, really, I have to say, something was affecting the communities in which we operate, was affecting the communities that we care about, and not much else felt like it really mattered. Right. In terms of giving people context, I will say some of that's been super valuable. Like we did a piece on the disinformation and misinformation that followed sort of the October 20th shootings, and sort of what the Nigerian army has been doing on that. And we've had that, you know, sort of like carried internationally, like Neiman Labs has carried that, Reuters has carried that in their newsletters. It's been sort of a really important sort of context setting around that particular issue. And I think actually, Ngozi, that's the one place where I might say the narrative that you've given is pretty clear and linear. The narrative on ground in terms of what happened there is still very, very unclear, deliberately so. The Nigerian military started a disinformation campaign, a cyber warfare campaign, sort of 2 days before that happened. And so there's a fair amount of very, very deliberate disinformation that went out around that, which we're still in the process of cleaning up, you know, and which we're still trying to get our heads around. But fundamentally, we covered it in detail and in context because no one else was going to do it, and it was important to our audience, it was important to our communities, so we felt a responsibility to do so.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tomiwa. And I think that, you know, with the misinformation, the disinformation, that is very deliberate. It's to, you know, it's to sow confusion. It's to sow confusion. It's to sow not just confusion. Well, confusion leads to doubt, and the minute there's doubt, doubt leads to more confusion and more chaos. So that is very, it's very, very deliberate. We actually have a question that I'm going to pose to the panelists. And I really want to get as many questions as we can, because it's a good opportunity to have like a wider discussion beyond us. So this is from Idris Basari. Thank you, Idris. What are some steps that diaspora Nigerians and Africa can take to amplify the ENDSARS messages and movement? Should diasporans have a different but unified manifesto to forge a new Nigeria and Africa? And how do they go about doing that? That's a big question, but it's an important one. Does anyone want to, Busayo, you're nodding. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think that's a massive question.
It's a massive question.
And I think before we can even get to that, I think well, okay. I think as Nigerians in the diaspora versus I think just diaspora Black people generally, I kind of have a very expansive view of what we mean by diaspora. So speaking specifically about Nigerians in the diaspora, I think there needs to be a little bit of truth telling about our country and how it got to be the way it is. I'm not sure that before we can even explain ENDSARS to anybody, I think we need to do a certain amount of kind of awareness of like the deep sort of entrenched corruption, kleptocracy, the bad governance that has made Nigeria what it is today, right? So in every area of public policy, Nigeria is behind. I think we're always very careful because we want to amplify our country and we want to make it sound wonderful. We are the biggest champions of Nigeria, like Naija no dey carry last and all of that stuff that we say, which is wonderful. But it also doesn't tell us the truth about the conditions of what people are living with in the country. And so most people, I mean, for me, my team is across the entire economic spectrum, right? So for the folks who work with me who are at the very bottom of this, ENDSARS is like a second, third concern because they can't even sometimes feed their families or that we don't have 24-hour electricity, right? So we have a larger problem as a country that goes far beyond ENDSARS. In terms of amplifying this message, I think what people are doing, participating in this webinar so that you leave this conversation and you know a little bit more. But I also think part of the tension now is like, where is there to run to, you know? Like we are all trying to get out of Nigeria, but I've lived in America. We'll find out next Tuesday if there's going to be an America after Tuesday, you know? So there is the list of refugee placement locations is getting shorter and shorter.
And
so
it's funny.
We have to fix it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Busayo, because and this is something that Tomiwa touched upon, is that after President Buhari's speech, if you want to call it a speech, last week, Google did an analysis of the top sort of searches on Google after he spoke. And the top 4 searches, I think the first one was, after he spoke, the top 4 searches on Google, according to Google Analytics, was, the first one was, how do I get out of Nigeria? The second one was, how do I get to Canada? And the third one was, how do I process a visa? How do I get a visa? But all 3 of them, I can't remember what the 4th one was, but all 3 of them are really pointing to people leaving. And last week, Femi Kuti was doing an interview on Al Jazeera, and Femi Oki, who was interviewing him for Al Jazeera, she asked him a question, and she said, what can the diaspora do? And he was like, well, one of the things we have to do is stop the brain drain and create an environment here for people to stay. And look, we have 2 completely different situations happening there. The need for people to stay, the need for people to feel like they have to leave. And that's almost feels like an impossible situation. Like, how do you consolidate that? I want to go to Michelle. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to quickly, because I think it'll lead to like to Michelle and to Tony, but to also, I think like the thorough line through this all is like narratives, like Tomiwa mentioned, like narratives through what he's doing, and the same thing with Busayo. And I think what's like critically important is all the different narratives, because there's so many narratives that are shaping the conversation around SARS in general. So like, for instance, many people who want to help in the diaspora don't necessarily understand what's happening on ground, because as Tomiwa said, the news you're getting from the BBC, like on Tuesday, if you listen to CNN, you heard the governor of Lagos State saying nobody was killed. Like, right. Nobody was killed, that didn't happen. If you were on Twitter and looked at the Nigerian military's Twitter feed, they were like, nothing happened there, you know? And then, but then if you're listening to Nigerian like media in country, you're hearing this narrative of like hoodlums and thugs, and that's also divisive. So I think a key part of it is how are we framing that story and the story of what's happening on the ground and getting it out. And I think like what Michelle does is like important to that. So I'd like to hear about like the framing of like narratives and how we're pushing that out to the diaspora to empower them to be able to, like within the diaspora, like kind of carry out some of the work that can't be done on the ground, because people within Lagos or within Nigeria can't really protest now, but they need people outside of the country kind of like pushing the message forward because they're not so able to within country.
Michelle, would you like to speak a bit to what the creative industries, and Tony after Michelle, but what the creative industries do at this time, or can do at this time, or not even just at this time, with the narratives, generally even speaking, as Ngozi just mentioned?
Sure. I was actually in the States when all of this happened a few weeks ago, and I literally just got back right after, just before the 20th. And I had a number of actor friends out there peacefully protesting. I have the videos as evidence, you know. And everyone just came together. The youth came together and they were doing the peaceful protesting at the different tolls. And so Nollywood was heavily involved, and they still are. And, you know, at this point, we're demanding for accountability. We're demanding for, like Ngozi said, you know, that narrative of what is the truth. You know, we're tired of the lies, the youth, the creatives, we're tired of the lies, and no one is buying what the government is selling. It's so clear that there's a cover up. It's so clear. And now they want to try and, you know, ban social media and all of that. And it's just like, are you kidding me? Like, it's so obvious that they've been lying and spreading those lies, you know, with their narrative. But for us in the creative industry, like I said in the introduction, I'm part of a group called White Harvest. And it's the members are Nollywood actors, directors, producers, writers, and this is our 4th year anniversary actually. And what we've been doing is that we came together to change the narrative for our youth and for the country and people as a whole, to project that image of hope, that image of accountability and good governance through short films and through storytelling, because that is our area, you know, arts and entertainment. And so we've come together. It's an NGO, you know, we've done it through our own resources. We've raised money, people have donated money for us to produce the short films. We've done it on our own time, you know, in between our own productions and projects that we've been doing, and to put that narrative out there. So when we had the elections, we actually put a short film out there to encourage the youth to go and vote, you know, to get your PVC card and to actually go and vote, you know, things like that that really hadn't been done before. So we're leveraging on star power, we're leveraging on fame and celebrity, you know, the celebrity, because they have such a massive reach of fans across social media and worldwide. So it's not even just for Nigeria and Nigerians, but to really change the narrative for the diaspora as well and internationally as well. So for us at this point, especially with what happened on the 20th, it was literally 10 minutes away from where I live. And I was absolutely, I don't even know the words, you know, to even describe how I felt hearing about this, because those could be some of my friends, you know, just a few days before, because they were out on the streets protesting. So it was very real to me, and the fact that it happened somewhere that I pass by, you know, nearly every day, it just became very real to me. And right now the youth, they're scared, like they're scared to even go out, you know, even carrying laptops, even carrying nice phones. They're scared they're going to be targeted by, you know, Sars and everything going on. And even their parents are terrified, you know, for their children. And, you know, they want everyone to stay indoors, but we can't live in a country where, you know, we're just indoors all the time and we're hiding and we're scared. And that's why it's important to have these kind of webinars where we speak out and voice, you know, as one. So another thing we're doing is that we're actually developing, because of all this police brutality and what happened on the 20th, we're actually developing a feature film to speak to this issue of the corruption in the police force. Also, we're going to celebrate good governance, because it's not just about shedding, you know, the negativity and the things that are wrong, but it's also changing the narrative of the possibility of the new Nigeria and what Nigeria could be, because Nigeria is a great nation full of amazing, talented people. And we need to start projecting those images, you know, through our storytelling, through our images, anywhere we can. So for us, that's what we're doing at White Harvest. So if the international community wants to support, they can definitely, you know, contact us and help us, whether it's through funding, whether it's through just giving out your voice and access, you know, that would be great also.
Okay, thank you. Tony.
It's a very interesting situation for me, because here in France, the connection with Africa tends to be a francophone one.
Right.
So in the national media here, not counting sort of like the 24-hour news cycle and whatnot, there's been very little coverage, if any at all, about the movements and actually what's going on. If anything, there's kind of more interest in what's going on in the US right now with the elections or Trump and things like that have kind of like overshadowed completely everything that's kind of happening in Nigeria. So kind of going back to Busayo's point as well, I think it's important to kind of make a distinction in terms of like historically where Nigeria as a nation is coming from that's gotten us to this point, as well as to also make a distinction between the levels of economic disparity between the various people who have either managed to get out of the country or who are either born abroad and who are Nigerian and have some sort of connection with the country and that sort of thing. So like for me personally, for instance, I've not been living in Nigeria consistently for the last 30 years or whatever it is, you know, that kind of thing. But I'm going back regularly. I kind of have family still there, lots of friends as well who are still on ground. But there are lots of people who are in diaspora who have a very big disconnect as far as like what's actually going on. So they're kind of getting information from very weird sources. There's lots of kind of like WhatsApp misinformation happening as well. So many people don't really know what is actually really going on ground. So you kind of have like, you have a group of people who are very much of the idea that kind of going back to this idea of like the brain drain, that basically Nigeria is booming right now and they need to get back to be able to take advantage of that. And it's not necessarily to go and help the community and kind of help the people there. It's kind of very much a personal gain kind of a situation. So as far as like ENDSARS and sort of like what the diaspora can do and how they can sort of like be participating within the movement, I think is very much down to influence as well. I mean, people who are in the industry, a lot of the information that I've actually gotten or kind of heard about the situation on ground has come from people who are either based stateside or in Canada or in Asia even as well, who are basically just like using their large influence or their large sort of like following to get the word out. Even if it's not necessarily giving specific information, it's basically pointing people towards sources that are a lot more verifiable, if that makes sense. And so I think that's been very important aspects of kind of getting word out for the movement. As far as like creatively, this is going back again to the historical context of how this all started in the first place. And for me, I kind of personally feel like it started really right from the birth of Nigeria as far as colonialism and the British influence in the country and how they had an influence in creating government and how government kind of like was working with the British or against sort of like the interest of the actual people. So there's already been a lot of division sowed from decades ago. You look at some things like Biafra, and it's very much an echo in a way of what's going on right now, where there's lots of misinformation going on. You have the government basically trying to get the people to understand that, well, it's basically their way or the highway. Right. And basically the oppressed population, the oppressed communities are essentially just trying to hold things together with no real way of actually fighting back. But today it's different because obviously you have social media, you have lots of international influence as well. And people on ground, the ones who are actually in direct danger, the youth who are actually working on things, who have iPhones or whatever it is, are the ones who are recording and documenting and getting stuff out there as well. I mean, people are sending me like live Instagram videos from like the actual protest sites. I got sent at least maybe like 3 different live links as well on the actual day of the 20th last week. And it was really powerful to see that happening because obviously there's people who are putting their lives on the line because unlike with the Black Lives Matter protests in the US where there's a little bit of accountability as far as like media visibility, in Nigeria that doesn't really exist. So obviously the government can go down to Lekki Tollgate and disconnect security cameras and there's no real accountability. And no matter how much people make noise, it's very hard to kind of get this very authoritarian government to kind of listen to what they have to say, because all they can say is like, oh, well, we've listened, yes, we'll disband the unit, and then, you know, you should be happy that we're doing even that we're listening to you. So I guess the question is how strong can the international influence actually be,
right,
when you have people like Hillary Clinton tweeting about ENDSARS, you have Kanye West or whoever it is tweeting about ENDSARS, and you kind of have to wonder, is that attention actually making any change on ground to people in Nigeria, in Lagos,
right,
who are actually doing the work? Or is it just kind of creating noise? Is it essentially like black box kind of like support? You need to actually do something that shows people the source of where this is all coming from, so that the government has no real escape route from everything that's happening right now.
And I think, thank you for that, Tony, because I think that's absolutely right. Like, it's, you know, again, just referencing the speech that, you know, the Buhari made eventually, he more or less said to everybody, you know, mind your own. Like, you know, at the end of the day, mind your business. You young people, you know, just stop, you know, stop your wahala, mind your noise. This is our issue. And, you know, that was when there was a huge outcry. We're going to do a quick poll now, actually, a live poll, while we have, and there's a lot of questions that we're going to take. So if we can bring up the poll that we're going to do. So this is the poll that we're going to do. So the poll really is, what can a platform like Demand Africa really, what is it that they can do? How would you like platforms like Demand Africa to facilitate the diaspora's ability to share these stories with audiences worldwide? So would you want more political programming? Would you want more forums and webinar discussions? Would you want more online content, online digital content? Or would you want more original programming from Africa? So that is a poll that we're going to have sort of going on. We can take this, we're going to move this to the side, but that's a poll that we're going to have. And while that poll is taking place and we're tabulating those results, I really want to go to some questions, because we've got a lot of questions here, and there's so many to choose from, and I'm going to try and get to everybody. But one that just stood out for me, one that's just stood out for me is one that comes from somebody called Rashida Peterson. Thank you, Rashida, for your question. So she says, it's my understanding that the feminist activists are going into hiding, and the feminist coalition are not continuing their work on ENDSARS, which is concerning. Her organization has been a funder of the feminist coalition, and they're looking for feminist groups to help fund. And they were told that groups were shutting down, which is obviously really concerning. Tomiwa mentioned the tech CEOs were thinking about suing the government. Are there any organizations that are still working and moving this forward? That's a very excellent question, Rashida. Thank you for that.
So I'd love to jump on that, if you don't mind.
Please, absolutely.
So I think the conversation's moving. So there's a good sense where the protests have been enormously successful, in that this is a lot more concession than the government usually gives to protesters. I mean, even the initial announcement of the disbandment of SARS in response to the protests was a fairly rapid response. Like, okay, you've protested, 2 days later, the president comes out and says, this has been disbanded. Of course, nobody believes that that meant anything, but it's actually, like, for the Nigerian government, an unusual level of responsiveness. I mean, if you talk to people who were in the protests for June 12th, which was after sort of the annulment of MK Abiola's election in the 90s. If you talk to those people, they're like, you know, all their protests got them were like bullets. Like, they just never ever got any kind of, whether substantive or even cosmetic responses from the government. And so the protests have kind of come to an end. I mean, basically the events of last week, Tuesday, kind of pulled and the sort of reprisals that then followed that. So the escalation of violence, the absence of any kind of police on the streets, so thus leaving criminals and hoodlums and the disenfranchised to kind of run wild, which was all very deliberate, I think, by the states to kind of, you know, essentially, like, you don't want the police, you know, then we're just gonna take the police away and let everybody run wild. So I think protests have accomplished as much as they were going to within the immediate. a generation has woken to how much power they have. They've shown how capable they can be. They've shown that they have tools and ways of doing things that a previous generation couldn't imagine. FEMCO specifically has, you know, sort of, they shut down, they finished their accounting for all the money they received. They essentially kind of closed up shop on the work that they'd done. Now, there's a number of conversations that have kind of sprung out of this. And for me, personally, I think those are the important ones moving forward, which is, what's the long term, you know? And there's, so one of the sessions that's happening, and you should all check it out, is this Saturday, there's a conference called We Move Niger. And I know that quite a few people who are involved in the protests are involved in that. So the website is wemoveniger.com. And you can go check that out and get to sort of the details of, you know, how, who's speaking. And quite a few people involved in the protests are putting that together, because the question is, we've done the protests. There've been panels set up, judicial panels set up in about 26 to 28 states now, which
28.
are looking into sort of police brutality, 28 now, which are actually going to try officers who have been identified to have sort of been involved in these things. So part of that movement is making sure those panels actually are effective, making sure they actually happen and they don't, you know, get derailed along the way, making sure the representatives that are on those panels have sufficient legal support and representation. We Move Niger, as far as I know, is not taking any contributions at the moment, but that may change. And so please keep an eye on it. They're setting up social channels at the like at the moment, and email and all of that. So I think you will be able to follow. And there's a conference on Saturday that will have a bit more of these conversations. And I know that some of the themes of the conversations are, I think the session I'm most interested in is one that goes from protest to power. And so
Right.
How do you move out of the streets into actually having long-term substantive effect on things, whether that's the police force or Nigeria as a whole? Because the truth of the matter is that protests are really effective for driving attention to issues in a narrow band of time, but they're not really problem solving. Protests don't actually solve problems. They set you up to be able to solve problems, basically. So I think the long-term organizations you should be looking to fund, the long-term organizations you should be looking to back, are those which are engaging with the political process, are those that are long-term engaging with things like judicial reform, are those that are long-term engaging with police reform in ongoing and substantive ways, and sort of keeping the police honest, keeping the government honest about actually sort of implementing these reforms. I will tie in just a quick answer, and apologies everybody, I will shut up in a moment, to Rebecca's question. Rebecca had a really interesting, Rebecca Jackson had a really interesting question, and she's talking about this feeling about diasporans, like being done with Nigeria.
Yes.
I think something that's really important to note is police reform and the problems with the police are one small section that reveal the dysfunction of Nigeria's government as a whole. So they're a symptom of a much, much deeper rot. And if you've been following this story in detail, which is possible to do on Twitter and through all the bits and pieces, but yeah, it's very hard to kind of piece together cohesively, which is why we write. You'll see that it's really not as easy as the president saying, actually, I'm going to fire the IGP and I'm going to reform this organization, because the dependencies between the politicians and the police and the military, they're tied in all kinds of incestuous and sort of like really like messed up ways. Our legislature, all of them are kind of in this really horrendous sort of like marriage of convenience where if you try to topple me, I will topple you. And that may involve an actual coup, but I don't think it actually needs to. It's just the threat of reprisal or the threat of withdrawing support for you, whether that's political or that's physical protection. So they are intertwined in quite difficult ways, what are called wicked problems, basically. Nigeria as a whole is a wicked problem. And so for me, I think there is a long-term project in terms of just fixing our governance that we really have to get into. And it's the only way the diaspora is going to be interested in coming back to Nigeria.
Yeah.
If you look at 2000 to 2004, 2006, even 2008, there was a massive wave of repatriation of people leaving the US and the UK and Canada and coming back to Nigeria. And it's because at that time there was this optimism that actually we're headed in the right direction. Actually, there were opportunities here. And I came back from the US as part of that wave. And that wave has been it's being completely reversed at the moment, where even the people who came, unless they've really, really established themselves, are starting to go back. People who came back more recently are starting to go back, and people who've never left are looking for the first exit out. And so you need a sense of optimism. You need to sense that the country is moving in the right direction. You need a sense that there are opportunities. And to get that sense, you just have to have better governance. And that's at all levels. That's at the presidency, that's at state level, that's in the legislature. And that is the work. And for me, I think that's the most important part of these protests, is the awakening that's happened, the sense that actually, so to speak to Ngozi's point, it was, Claudine, was your point. After the president's speech, there was kind of this absolute realization. Not sure who the audience is here. I'm going to say it, in the way that makes the most sense, that this president ain't shit. This government ain't shit. They don't care about you, and they're not planning to be about you.
Right.
And that realization made some people go, I'm heading for the hills, and made some other people go, right, how do we get them out? How do we replace these people? How do we fix this thing? So I consider myself in the latter camp, and those are the people that I really root for, are the people who are like, you know what? We got to get to the polls. We've got to build the structures to actually beat these guys and to replace them, because they're not going to do anything. They're too intertwined in the systems that they've built, and they're too comfortable in them. And so they are not going to do anything else. So if you want to support the movement, if you want to support this, it's long-term. It's how do you fix the judiciary? How do you fix the legislature? How do you replace the politicians in the presidency and the ministers? And that's the work. That's really the long-term work.
And that's the work. And thank you for that, Tomiwa, because that is the work. And there is an election in 2023. So also that's 3 years. And 3 years isn't a long time, but it is also enough time to start chipping away.
To do a lot. And there are elections all the time, just by the way.
Do a lot to start chipping away at the very least. But I'm Ngozi. Sorry, and Ngozi. So do you want? So you've been summarizing some of these questions, because we have a lot of questions and we definitely want to get to more of them. So Ngozi, you've been summarizing the questions. You want to ask them to the panel?
I think a lot of the questions in the chat are people in the diaspora, they want to know what specifically can they do. I think a lot of people, based on what they're asking, have been asking that question. So I think from where each of you are sitting, I'd like to, and because there are many approaches, Tomiwa just kind of laid out very well, kind of one approach, judiciary and through the government. But I'm sure each of you, from where you sit as content creators, as lawyers, may have different approaches as how you want to go about doing it. So I think if you can each kind of give an actionable step, and maybe that actionable step is a particular Twitter handle to an organizer that is doing work on the ground that people can support. But I really would like people to kind of leave with actionable steps, because that's what a lot of people are asking in the chat. What specifically can we do?
I have some ideas. I think that part of the way we got to where we are is that our political class, which is a very small percentage of the population, knows that they can escape to England or the United States or Australia or India or wherever they want to run to when they have a health problem. That's where they send their children to go to school. I mean, one of the blessings of COVID, right, was that for the first time ever, some of these people were not able to leave the country. Some of them still found their way out of the country, but a lot of them were not able to leave. I think depending on what happens next week, obviously this may not work, but I do think certainly if we have a change in government in America, we absolutely should begin to pressure these governments to stop allowing our leaders to get visas to come to their countries, to come spend money that they have stolen and they are spending on empty apartments throughout London and New York City. It is just a fact, right? These come the same way that, you know, the Swiss government and all the European governments were acquiescence to Abacha's looting of the entire country. So is these current Western governors, I would say, or governments, specifically the UK. I feel like those folks in the UK, certainly if our leaders know that, you know what, they are here with everyone. For me, my biggest concern with this is less about the class that can afford an iPhone, right? Like that class in Nigeria usually has somebody, and I'm not saying that anything they experienced was not horrible. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the people lower than that. Some of my friends of my friends, people who work with me, who don't have any money, who, you know, one of my workers literally said, like, you have to make me an ID card so that I can carry around because I keep getting stopped and harassed by the police. People who are queer, right? Like there was a lot of sort of pushback with like kind of saying, you know, the LGBT movement is trying to hijack this movement. But there's a specific concern that they have that does not apply to straight people, right? When your phone gets taken by SARS, if you're an LGBTQ person, what they're looking for is something very different. They're looking for any evidence of LGBTQ behavior, whatever that means, so that then they can further extort you, so they can further beat you, so they can further torture you. So this is an issue of life and death for people. And especially Nigeria has a population of 200 million. Mm-hmm. What are we running to? How many of us can escape? Like what country is gonna absorb 200 million people? So I'm very cognizant that we can't afford for Nigeria to disintegrate into complete utter chaos with violence. Like that, I completely understand, because that will just be the worst thing that could happen. Mm-hmm. I think for the first time, there needs to be additional pressure on this government. Other things, a lot of the members of this government, right, are members of churches, right? So let's talk about a vice president. I know people say that he doesn't have any power, but he is a member of the Redeemed Church, which is one of the largest churches in Nigeria. Is Osibanjo going to be allowed to come back to the church and everyone's going to worship with him next Sunday? After he hasn't resigned, he's still part of this government. I think us of our class also needs to hold some of our friends and the people that we know accountable who work in government or spend 2 years in government and go back to the civilian class. So there's a lot that people could be doing within their church communities, within like the political leaders that, you know, you look at if you go look at the IG for some of these people, up until 3 weeks ago, it was like, big up, sir, we support you, sir. You know, everyone, that proximity to power is really attractive to a lot of Nigerians. And I completely understand it because people are suffering. Everything that happened, I just want to make this really quick point. The palliative care, right? So there were all this COVID aid that was basically discovered after October 20th. That governments had been hiding. They had been putting this stuff in warehouses. And most of you may be like, why are you storing buildings and buildings of rice and all these other goods? It's because they want to bring it out in election time so they can use it to buy people's votes. And this is like people who had nothing during COVID. Nigeria shut down. So it shows you how much the leadership cares about the average Nigerian. I am talking about the people that have no hope of leaving, the people who are literally striving to make it. What can Diaspora do? Whatever you can do in your own little way. Starting my company, it's been beneficial to me. It's been beneficial to my people back home. It can be done. It is not easy, but it can be done. So I really, really like push people. I know everybody's appetite for Nigeria is different, but I really push people to reach out back home. For Black Americans, we have a lot to learn from them. They fought for civil rights in this country. I am the beneficiary of that fight. There's so much in what they've done and what they were able to get this government to do that we can also learn from.
And I think thank you so much, Busayo. There's somebody who's like saying like what Busayo is saying is like fire. And so I want to just, something that you just now said, there's a comment here that I really want to draw reference to. It's from Franklin. He says that I think the US civil rights movement veterans can offer some guidance and mentorship in the organizational approach and how to sustain activism over a long period of time, which is exactly what you're alluding to. And that's a brilliant suggestion of how the diaspora can get involved. And Ngozi, you have some more questions to summarize for the panel, and then over to, if we can direct those questions to Michelle and Tony. Thank you, Busayo.
I also wanted to make a quick comment, kind of piggybacking off of what Busayo just said, but then also it links to some of the stuff Tomiwa was talking about. So in the US right now, there's an election. Who knows what's going to happen next week? But what we do know happens with elections anywhere is after the election ends, you have a ton of people with great skills who have nothing to do. If anybody's on this call, attending this webinar, who has been doing work, I think, on political campaigns or has like insights, I think that's another way that you can maybe connect with people on the ground in Nigeria who's doing this work, because many of these people are volunteers. They're volunteering in America, and you'd be surprised about how many would be interested in providing service or guidance about like kind of organizing on the ground and doing like grassroots work and providing some of the insights that they learned on their campaigns. So I think like continuing to reach out to the diaspora in that kind of way for like, you know, resources and intel. So I just wanted to like quickly add that. And no, I think a lot was touched upon.
There's a comment that I want to add. We were
Yeah,
talking earlier, and again, I'd love, this is open to all the panelists to speak to, and this is more of a comment, but it really rides off of what everybody was saying. This is from Franklin again. Nigerians should be careful about inviting foreign influence. So I've lost the question again, sorry. There's so many questions coming through. Let me just bring that back up again. Sorry, Ngozi, continue, because the question's gone in my stream. You can go ahead and summarize one of them until I get back to Franklin's point. Okay. Oh, I found it, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, he said Nigerians should be careful about inviting foreign intervention. Great powers do not address human rights objectives in foreign countries for free. And that is spot on. And Ngozi and myself were talking about this last week. When we do begin to invite foreign powers, which often are, former colonial powers, do they really have our interests at heart? I think the answer should be no, they don't. There's an activist in America, and he says something that's is quite damning, but it's quite true. He's always saying that Black people don't have any friends. We have each other, and that's it. And that's not always the most PC and most popular thing to say, but only we can develop ourselves. So I think we do have to be careful, as Franklin mentioned, that when we start involving.
I think Claudine is frozen. Okay, so I'll pick up. And she's in the UK too, and she got bad internet. All right, so kind of like what Claudine was saying, like when we invite, being careful, and I think this is a bigger question as we look at like who are our allies. I think often across the continent we look to the West to like help us out and to be our strongest ally. So I think that kind of gets into like looking at the diaspora as an ally. What kind of work can the African Union do? Like looking at African free trade agreements, it's all very big, but I think it's around the issue of not relying so heavily on the West to assist us in these matters. Because one thing I think will happen if there's a lot of pressure is sanctions. And to me, this is just my opinion. I'm not really with sanctions against African countries because I think it hurts the very people you want to help. So I think looking at solutions outside of like axing like a Hillary Clinton or whomever to kind of step in or the UK Parliament. I know a lot of people have been appealing to the UK Parliament and signing petitions for them to take it up to make interventions. But I think it's continuing to keep the lines of communication open between people like us in creating the solutions on the ground. So, okay, you're back, Claudine? Okay, take yourself off mute.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back. Tony, you were shaking your head. So do you want to make a comment?
I mean, I think kind of going to the point of sort of Western influence, I think there's been quite enough Western influence in Nigeria from the very beginning that kind of got us into this mess. In Africa in general, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the UK are kind of like the biggest culprits of kind of like why we are the way we are right now. And going to them for any kind of help, I think is kind of like a lost cause. But even outside of that, kind of going back to this idea of like how diaspora can help, I kind of feel very similar to how the civil rights movement and sort of Black Lives Matter movement is working in the US right now. It's very much a movement of the communities who are affected by what's actually going on. So like, for instance, as a photographer, for instance, there's loads of photographers who've been documenting the protests in New York and around the country and in the US as well, with the George Floyd protests and all that kind of stuff going on as well. And there's been a discussion around the idea of leaving Black photographers to document their own stories. And I feel it should be very much the same thing for people in diaspora, leaving people who are actually on ground in Nigeria to dictate how we move forward and what actually needs to happen. Most protest movements are youth movements. And I think the youth are kind of the ones who are on the front lines right now, who are actually really putting themselves at risk, who have a better cognizance of actually what is going on ground and how it affects the local populace across all various economic strata. And I mean, just as an example, you look at groups like the Ikorodu Boys. I know you probably know about them, the guys who they kind of got a lot of attention lately because the directors of the Avengers basically saw like a remake trailer that they did, and then they basically send them a whole bunch of like equipment and things to do. And these are people who I guess one would consider from the lower class of society, who have an education and determination to do things that are not reliant at all on government or anything like that to make their way and to actually try and do what it is that they want to do. There's a passion behind their drive that I think we should respect and support, but not necessarily try and intervene ourselves. I think where diaspora can sort of like have more of an effect is in creating more of a general awareness of Nigeria as a whole, because a lot of the stories and the narratives that of Nigeria that basically go out into the international sphere are either to do with celebrity, let's say, or government fraud and corruption and all that sort of thing. And I kind of feel like it's slightly impenetrable for people who are not living in the country to understand exactly what that means for people who are living there day to day. And so just like in the US is like a country of immigrants, and you have a whole cinema of people talking about things like the Holocaust or the Jewish experience, the Black experience, the Latino experience. And there's no real idea of what is the Nigerian experience. Mm-hmm. As far as we know, there's like popular Nigerian Americans or popular British Nigerians or popular people within Nigeria itself who kind of crossed over into the West. But there's no real understanding of where they came from and what that history is in the country. I'm sure there's loads of people here. You probably can tell me a lot more information about the Holocaust or about American history or Abraham Lincoln or whatever it is that you can tell about anything in Nigeria that's actually happened. And I kind of feel, for instance, for me as a filmmaker, I feel that the films that come out of Nollywood right now, and even in Nigerians in diaspora within the industry, are not necessarily focused on telling those stories. They're focused on becoming the next Hollywood film, becoming the next big thing, right. Kind of telling this kind of, I guess, kind of almost glossed over version of what the country is or what people hope it could be, but they're not kind of like focusing on the stories that actually made the country what it is. And I think that's kind of very important as well, to try and find some balance. And expecting help from Western society is I mean, like someone mentioned earlier, it doesn't come for free. And it's something that we shouldn't have to rely on in the first place. I mean, the youth action, everything that happened with Lekki toll gates, all the things that, you know, Tomiwa's company, the various people online, the Nigerian Twitter, even Nigerian Instagram, they're doing a lot more work in terms of actually getting the word out there and getting actual proper verifiable information to people in the diaspora and I think it's up to them to basically just kind of share it out, not just to other Nigerians, but to people around the world, so they can have a better understanding of actually what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ngozi, do you have any more summary of questions?
Now, mostly it's just people who are kind of leaving their comments, not questions, but I think it's still a general sense of like specific actions, like wanting to come out of, and I don't know that that's something that maybe will come out of this conversation, like specifically, like what are the specific bridges, like what is the organization we should amplify, who should we be donating to? I think that's kind of the sentiment within the chat.
If I may offer something.
Before we get to that, we're just going to go to share the results of the poll that we did earlier in the webinar. And the question was that we did in the poll, thank you, Topo, for bringing that up. How would you like platforms like Demand Africa to facilitate the diaspora's ability to share these stories with audiences around the world? So thank you for everybody who responded, and these are the results. So by a slither, the biggest from all the people who responded, more original programming from Africa, and that aligns with exactly what Tony was just saying. Real people on the ground documenting stories from our gaze, not from like the Hollywood glossy gaze. So that's like over, just by slither, it was more programming from Africa. And that was 58% of you. And then 52% of you said more forums and webinars for discussion. So that pleases us at Demand Africa, because that lets us know that we are, by putting this webinar on, it's what you want. You want these forums of discussion, so that's great. And then 31% has said more online digital content and 21% more political programming. I actually thought political programming would feature higher, but it's this is always interesting to see the results. So thank you for these results. Anything about those results interesting or stand out for any of the panelists?
I think Michelle should have something to say about that.
I think so, Michelle. This is basically a response on your lap, right?
Yeah, I'm surprised. I thought it would be more political programming there.
Me too.
But yeah, I'm excited that people want to see more original content. That's exactly what we're doing. And I love what Jay Farrell said in the comments, and yeah. I replied. He said about creating impactful awareness by engaging funding content via media and entertainment arts, which is exactly what we'll be doing at White House through social media, which has been a very powerful tool to talk about, the narrative for a new Nigeria, especially with the elections coming up, as you had mentioned, and also celebrating good deeds. And that's very important for us because, like I said earlier, it's not just about showcasing the negativity and things that are broken, but also to also show how things could be and the better future and a new Nigeria and the way things could actually work. Because it is possible. A lot of people are, when I moved back over 10 years ago, people kept saying, oh, but this is Nigeria, it can't be done. And I literally had to ban people around me from saying that. And I said, you guys need to stop saying that because it's like a mental block. Once you say that, it's like you believe it and then you don't even strive for anything better. And so I literally, in the entertainment industry, I had to go out on my own and create a film, and literally I just broke all barriers and proved to people that this can be done in Nigeria. So it's not a Nigerian thing, but it's also a mentality as well and how people see things. So that's part of what we're going to be doing with the narrative. And I just love what Jay said. So yeah, definitely, I think those original stories and those ideas are important. The government have no say. We're definitely going to be doing more social media campaigns also. So watch out for that on social media. So if anyone wants to plug in, I just posted the email for anyone who wants to get in touch with us and support us, whether amplifying what we're doing or being part of what we're doing, you can get in touch.
Thank you for that, Michelle. So as Ngozi was mentioning, one of the things that, Demand Africa wanted to get from this webinar and from this discussion is also to we've been talking about it sort of throughout the conversation, but to arrive at some solutions, some places where we can go for resources, for more information. And Ngozi, you put together, I think for the last 2 weeks, you've been putting together this great resource. I think it's a live Google document that has links and resources to all sorts of information. So can you speak about that and why did you start that, and what does that document contain and how people can access it?
So I think we'll share it like in the email we sent, or we can drop it in the chat, either one, just so people can have a look at it. But essentially, as things began to unfold from the first protest that started happening around the 8th, I just started posting things to my Instagram page. But what I noticed was that no one, for whatever reason, there's so much happening in the world. So I'm not going to necessarily criticize anybody. There's so much happening and people are dealing with a lot, COVID, civil unrest around the world. But what I noticed was that it wasn't really hitting people. Like, I was like, there are protests happening. They're actually shooting at protesters. Like before the 20th, protesters were killed. Yeah. And people just didn't know. I was having all these conversations and people didn't know. So I just kept creating Google Doc. I created the Google Doc and like started from like, what is SARS? This is what's happening. And then whenever there'd be an incident, I would add more information. And I just wanted to create a space for people in the diaspora to be able to go to figure out how they can help. So initially, like nobody was going there, but then the 20th happened and then there was a lot more interest because obviously it was horrific, and that kind of gets news play when things are horrific. So then lots of people began to go to the page just trying to find out what exactly is SARS. So when you go there, you can get like a brief history, you can hit links and kind of follow what happened, but then there are also resources to support. So like if you want to support photographers who are documenting on the ground who need protective gear, you can do that. If you're interested in like what's going on with people who needed medical help, blood donations and things of that sort, you can do that. So it's just like lots of information for you to figure out like, what are the ways I can support? If it's just like, what are the hashtags for me to follow? The different hashtags are there as well.
Thank you for that, Ngozi. So I'm looking at the time and I'm acutely aware we've been speaking for like an hour and nearly 20 minutes, which is great. Then we could go on for an hour and 20 minutes more. But I would like to go to each of the panelists, and if you could in 1 minute or less, like your final words in 1 minute or less before we wrap up this evening. So we start with Michelle, always ladies first. So we'll start with Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for inviting me for this webinar. It was so important to have this, especially with all the mixed interpretation of what's going on out there. So it's very important to have this kind of platform where the truth is spoken and not just a whole bunch of lies and confusion. So I'll just really just want to thank everyone, and I just want to say, just get involved however you can, whether it's through amplifying on social media, whether it's through, getting in touch with us over here and seeing how you can support, like do something. Like, I think it's important that everyone does something, and, everything can come together. You do a little bit and, the world changes, but not just kind of sit back and keep quiet. I think, it's everyone's responsibility here and around the world, just to have, to see, the new Nigeria, which we're hoping for, and praying for. And yeah, so my comment should just be, do something, however small, however little your contribution, will be impactful either way.
Thank you, Michelle. Busayo?
Thank you.
I was really hopeful by what happened in the last 2 weeks. I think for the first time, a lot of youth who felt like, one of my photographer always says, Nigeria is where my dream has come to die. Like, that is literally stuff people say. And I feel like for the first time, people woke up from a deep slumber, and some of the usual, kind of tools that's used to keep them passive or to kind of allow them to just continue to live this lives of quiet desperation began to kind of fall, And so like, even if the Buhari and them want to deny what happened, like, people do not live easy lives there. People are really suffering. They're being killed by lack of hospitals, lack of schools. I mean, there's so many things that are wrong in that society. But I'm so happy that Michelle mentioned like the new Nigeria. I think part of that is education around like how politics should work. Like, there's always going to be corruption, but like the way that politicians rely on, what they call it, stomach infrastructure, where you bring rice to buy votes, all of that stuff, I think scales are beginning to fall from people's eyes. So I'm really excited that, 2023 will be different. And the same political playbook that the politicians have always played will begin to kind of at least fail, at least be chipped at a little bit. And I really hope that, we can begin to transform our country, because we're clearly like a brilliant group of people. So like, there's this small group of like psychopaths holding us all hostage. I mean, really, it's like we're being held hostage by these people. And there's way more of us than of them, that's the other thing too, except they have guns.
Right. Yeah, they have. And it's interesting you said that, because the other day on Twitter, I saw somebody made this comment and I responded to it. And they said, oh, the country is run by sociopaths. And then, which is to your point, you call them psychopaths, sociopaths. I mean, where's the difference? And the comment is, do you become a sociopath when you go into politics, or does politics make you become a sociopath? I mean, which one? Either is, the result is pathology in the worst kind of way. Can we go to Tony? A final comment in any direction, 1 minute or less, and then we'll go to Tomiwa, and then we'll wrap up.
I'll just have a short one about my industry, I guess.
Yeah.
The brief I would say would be support Black creatives, so support Nigerian creatives wherever they are in the world, especially in Nigeria. And then secondly, in regards to the actual SARS movement, we have to remember that it's not just the actual SARS unit that's actually corrupt and has been causing problems in Nigeria over the last few decades, and that no political system is perfect. There's corruption everywhere, even in the US and UK, wherever it is in the world. And any political structure is only as good as the people who are in it. And I think the youth who are on the streets protesting today are the ones who are going to be running for office tomorrow. And we need to basically encourage them and keep them within this mindset that they actually are able to effect change, not just for themselves, but for their communities and for others as well. And that we basically should support them in any way we can, be that investing in jobs in the country, investing in various industries within the country as well, so that people across all various economic strata are able to actually have access to all these various things and actually effect change for themselves within the country.
Thank you, Tony. Tomiwa?
I think I'll pick on something that Tony said, which is the people who are in government matter, and these people on the streets have proven themselves like much more capable. And so from my personal perspective, I mean, and my long-term sort of involvement is trying to get better people into government. And I've actually joined a political party, and it's called Youth Party, and I'll drop a link to the address in the comments. And I think that's worth checking out. And for people who are looking for specific ways to support, that might be a way, is to support a party. But yeah, I think getting involved in whatever way you can is important. Getting involved with long-term change is important. And so that is what I would kind of say as my final word for people who do want to get sort of involved in some way or the other. And thank you very much for having me today.
No, thank you. Thank you for joining, and thank you for mentioning that. And we will include details. You mentioned this is the youth party, you said?
Yes, I just dropped the link in the...
Okay. We'll add that to the Google Doc, and this Google Doc is also going to live on the Demand Africa and the Africa Channel platforms as well as we're sharing it. And Ngozi, do you have any, a minute or less, any final words before we wrap up?
I think like I'm so moved by like everything currently being in the US, and I was here all summer to experience the Black Lives Matter movement and being a Black person in America, but then also being Nigerian. I'm just so inspired. All throughout my life, I've been inspired by being a Black American and the struggles that happen here. And then seeing how Nigerians, I think a lot of what happened on the ground was being able to look at what was happening on the ground all summer in America and being like, we have the capacity to organize in that same way and get change across our country. And I see it happening across the continent. So I guess my last words is really like we're saying, narratives and communications and being able to continue to connect and collaborate with one another, because we're inspiring each other's movements. And like, this is moving towards something that is, like very important and critical that needs to happen. Like Nigeria, because of what happened over the course of 2 weeks, will be different in 2023. Like nobody, like it's gonna change. And I think that's happening. It's happening in the Congo, it's happening in Namibia, all around Africa. So just all of us, like everybody on this call, continue to pay attention, continue to seek out information in ways you can amplify it, because that's critically important.
It is. Thank you for that, Ngozi. So in wrapping up from my perspective, as I mentioned when we first started the webinar, I am not Nigerian, but I had a conversation with Michelle, and I said to Michelle, I consider myself an honorary Niger babe, just simply because I've spent so much time in Nigeria in the last decade. And so Nigeria and Nigerians are very dear to my heart. You know, this is to Busayo's point earlier about, as people in the diaspora, there is a lot you can do. I have a PR agency. We opened our PR agency and we're based in the US. We do, the lion's share of our work is based in Africa, and a big proportion of that is based in Nigeria. So there is a lot you can do wherever you live and wherever you stand. And I just want to wrap up with 2 quotes from 2 great but very different influential Africans that will speak to what it is and why this is important. So for me, standing here as a Caribbean, British, American person and why Africa is so important to me, the late great Kwame Nkrumah has that phrase that is so important. I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. And because Africa was born in me, Africa should be important to all of us. And then to finalize, I want to quote Burna Boy. This is a quote that Burna Boy said earlier this year. And he said, in order for Black lives to matter, Africa must matter. And that means Africa must matter to all of us. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Busayo. Thank you, Tomiwa. Thank you to my co-host, Ngozi. And thank you to Demand Africa and the Africa Channel for putting on and creating this forum for us to come together and have a discussion like this. This is what's needed. Our poll showed us that that's what was needed. We will be sending out an email that will have a link to the document Ngozi created. It's a live document with resources, with information, about where you can go to help, what you can do to help. And I want to also thank you to all the attendees. You've asked I've been so encouraged because you've asked such brilliant questions in the chat. Every time I look over, there's like 10 more questions. So thank you so much for all the questions that you've asked. We will be continuing this further, but hashtag ENDSARS. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, everybody. Bye, Tony. Bye, Michelle.